Okay, good morning. Good morning. So let's continue what we're doing. We concluded the actual text in Hemshech Ayin Beis, and we've gone over to the essay or the mimer or whatever you want to call it, the note that I wrote, the essay I wrote, that reviews and suggests how the Hemshech Ayin Beis would have continued had the Rebbe Rashab finished it. Obviously, it's done with the qualification that it's I take full responsibility for whatever is written there, meaning also if I make any mistakes. So with that said, we began reading inside the essay. We reached page 3. You'll remind me which page we're on, because I'm doing it on the phone. Actually, I didn't print it out yet. Okay, so what we've been doing is this. First establishing, I'm just summing up what we did yesterday. First establishing that the Hemshech wasn't concluded, and with the different indicators, the questions that the Rebbe Rashab asked, themes and ideas that he began discussing that he said, I will discuss later, but did not. So all that clearly indicates that there's a lot more to be said. The good news is that we have the Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, namely Amagbil Sheves, upon which we can build. And together with everything the Rebbe Rashab did say, including even the things that he said that he will explain later, when you put it all together, you could figure out, and that's what this whole effort is about, figuring out the answers to those questions, the themes that would have been, how they would have developed. And so we're building it on what we call an eiserne brick, on a solid foundation, on an iron, strong bridge. It's expression in Yiddish. And we began by doing the following. The Magbil Sheves are the two Maimorim. And before we go into the details, and the Rebbe Rashab himself cites those Maimorim, you can say. So we went into now an introduction of a summary of all of Hemshech Ayin Beis. So what did we cover so far? That the central theme of Ayin Beis is Mamutza, interface between the divine and existence, and that interface begins with Keser, Ratzon, that there's a will that creates the first bridge, that God wants existence. You take that away, there's no existence altogether, let alone a bridge. That Keser exists on all levels. There's a Keser in every world, in general terms. To explain that, he begins with the difference between Pnimi and Makif, with Makif being Ratzon, Keser. Pnimi is the divine energy that manifests within existence. So part of the interface that relates to existence, part of the interface that's beyond existence. Okay. Continuing on, this is the higher than Ishtalshalos, the within Ishtalshalos, Ovis, Matan Torah, the two levels of Aleph, Chachma and Pella, in two ways. Either Chachma and Pella are, Chachma is Abkeli for Pella, or that's exactly the same thing. And there's two ways that there is the yichud, the interface and connection between Elokus and Elamus, Adamim Chelekayim Melech Mamayl Lamata, which is primarily through Torah, and Mamat Lamayl primarily through Tefillah. And then the Rebbe Rashab begins the long discussion, like I wrote here, 559 pages, where he discusses Mamat Lamayla through Tefillah. The Chetzit Tzuras, the two halves of a full image, and they connect to be able to create that interface we're looking for. But then comes the big question. How is it possible to connect the world of Biyah that come after the Parsa and after the Tzimtzum with the reality before the Tzimtzum? So briefly, it's not brief in the Hemshech, but briefly here in this note, in this essay I wrote, that's through the transformation of the Tzimtzum through Araveda. And this is the crux of really what we do. God created the world, He created all these tools and all these stepping stones and interfaces. But our part is to overcome the tzimtzum and transform it and reveal its true purpose, that it's not just to conceal in order for us to exist. It's actually part of God's bigger plan. And the goal of the tzimtzum is to reveal. Just as the goal of revelation is to be transmitted into our systems, integrated into our systems on our terms. Okay, so now we are up to, that's where we stopped, I believe. Let me see. Oh yeah, and a big part of this is based on the pasuk, Yadaita yem v'shavesa levavecha ki Hashem hu alikim, Shemayim emal va'aretz mitachas ein oid. This is the Avedim Matlamayla, in contrast to Atar Es Ladas, which is like Torah, Beikar through Torah, Mamayla Mata. That's where we stopped. Should have added here. You know what? I may add it. Wasn't so relevant to the bigger picture, but I just said it briefly. I'll just reiterate it, that it comes to we've ultimately transformed the tzimtzum because we come to understand that the tzimtzum itself is not an end in itself. Yes, it's necessary for the student to exist as independent consciousness, but the ultimate goal of the tzimtzum is gilui. And when the teacher conceals his intelligence to teach the student, concealment is not the end, it's the means. It's a means. How do you convey to a beginner student an idea? So you need to conceal. And we actually learned at the end of Ayin Beis as well, the Pnimius and Chitzenius. But the goal of the concealment is gilui, is that the student should understand and then grow. The teacher doesn't build in any inherent blocks that the student cannot grow in his intelligence. So the tzimtzum, therefore, is more complicated. It's not just initially, it's there to create space for an independent reality, independent consciousness. But the goal of the tzimtzum is gilui. And he also explains the other way around, that the gilui, before the tzimtzum, why did Hashem create gilui? In order to be able to transmit it through the tzimtzum to the recipients. So bottom line is that tzimtzum now takes on a whole new level of import, because its role is not just to block out or to diffuse the light, it's also to connect the two. So the tzimtzum is also part of the mamutza, of the interface. But this requires our work, because if you don't do any work, the tzimtzum will have its effect, and there'll be a schism between before tzimtzum and post tzimtzum, pre-tzimtzum and post tzimtzum. So that maybe I'll add it in the essay, just briefly. We'll see. Okay, let's continue now. And I posted an updated version that has some of the corrections, the page numbers, and as well as some of the mistake. There was a mistaken number up there, so more complete. This latest one that I've just posted.
I just posted a PDF of it as well.
Okay, good. And keep in mind that we'll need one more. There's one more one more chapter to this, and then we'll have a complete picture. But the good news is we could always edit it and modify if need be. I think it's pretty solid as is, but still, there's always tweaks. Okay, let us continue. So we are on page 3. Is that correct? Right? In the PDF.
Yes,
page 3?
the first full paragraph on page 3. Bethmelech Gimel.
Yeah, you posted the PDF?
Yes, I did.
Oh, here it is. Yeah, thank you. See, you know what? Let me open the PDF. It'll be
easier.
Better. Good. Yeah, page 3. Right, here we go. Problem is it's a little smaller. Okay, we'll figure it out. Okay, so let's continue reading. This is, again, we're reading my own writing. However, obviously,
you could turn the phone the other way, Rabbi. It might help you, just FYI. If you turn the phone 90 degrees.
I know, I do that, but now it's, okay, maybe it'll be helpful there. Thanks. Okay. Whole thing is, let's see what's happening here. Okay. Okay, so let's continue. This is continuation of my essay on the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis. So we go on now. So tefillah is the primary theme for the 559 pages from middle of volume 2. And there he also addresses the transformation of the tzimtzum. Okay. Then that continues. B'chelik gimel shel hemshech. I continue. Which begins on page Aleph Reish Zayin, which is 1207. Literally the third volume. Remember, the third volume is unique in the fact that the Rebbe Rashab had left Lubavitch by then, and he no longer was delivering these Maimarim. Up till the end of volume 2, he was delivering the Maimarim that he was writing, meaning actually saying them on the respective Shabbosim or holidays. Now we're dealing with a period where he's no longer saying the Maimarim. It's called Chelik Shaloi Nemar, the part of Ayin Beis that was never delivered, never said. And it also is distinguished, therefore, that you don't have breakdown of Maimarim altogether. It's just one long flow, volume 3, as we've seen. Obviously, also has no chapters. That ended a lot earlier in Parsha Truma and Ayin Hey. So, just as an aside, just mentioning that. So, what does he begin in B'cheli Gimel? The end of the pasuk, explaining the words Ein Oid. In other words, up till there, he explained Hashem Elokim b'Shamayim al v'Aretz mitachas. That's the two parts of the interface. And we're talking about Avodah Mamat Lamayla. Yedai Tayem v'Shavesa Levavecha. The two parts of the interface is the divine, as he said, Hashem and Elokim, Gili and Tzimtzum. But then comes the last two words in the pasuk, Ein Oid. So in volume 3, he now dissects those two words and says, Shezeh koi al afichas hahelem atzmei. So till now, we've been talking about not transforming the helem itself. We're talking about transforming the tzimtzum by revealing that the tzimtzum is b'shvil hagili. The tzimtzum is revealing light, ultimately. And the gilui is meant to be channeled through the tzimtzum. That's havayahu alakim. When you say ein oid, you're saying the very fact that God concealed his presence, besides for the fact that it is the purpose of it is to reveal, it itself is a divine power. This is a whole other discussion now. Ein oid. And it's important, I'm emphasizing very strongly that's a separate discussion, because the Rebbe Rashab will say exactly those words later, that it's a separate inyan. So a big part of Ayin Beis does not address Ein Oid, is a unique section that talks about the very tzimtzum itself, which is a very powerful point if you think about it. Because it's one thing to say that the tzimtzum is going to lead to gilui, just like the teacher conceals his ideas, in order for the student to be able to hear Aleph Beis on his terms, and then not stop there, but continue to grow. From the Aleph, he grows to his knowledge and expands his mind, and the Kalim expand, and he's able to take more Oir. No, it's Elikim is able to get more of Havaya. When you say Ein Oid, you're talking about the very power of the teacher, or of God in this case, to conceal also has an element. So the Tzimtzum itself, like he says, Gvuras shanim taku b'sharshem behelama atzmi. So this is talking about the Gvuras, that the severities or the tzimtzumim that are being sweetened not through the chesed. We're not talking about Havaya sweetening Elikim. We're not talking about Elikim becoming a keli to the gili oir of Havaya. We're talking about the very sweetness that you find in the helem itself, and that's the discussion in Cheli Gimel until Ubezem Esayim Ba'omed Aleph Shimon Tes, and then on page 1349. So basically from 1207 till 1349 in volume 3, Habir ba'yichud mamata lamayla. So that concludes the discussion on the yichud from the bottom up. So essentially we have two aspects to bottom up. One bottom up, that the bottom becomes a keli, elikim, and havaya work with each other, havaya hu elikim. Another aspect of yichud mamata lamayla is that the mata itself, like he explains, the body itself will nourish the soul. The kelim themselves will be higher than the oir, not just receive from the oir. So Havayu Elikim is more like the moon will receive from the sun, but it'll receive all of the sun, whereas today it's diminished. Lasid Lavi, the moon itself will be even greater than the sun, as he says. Laila kiyom yoir. So that's another dimension in Yichud Mamata Lamaila. Far more in Aveda, far more integrated with the Tachtin, with the Helam. And in Aveda, he compared that to the distress of the Baal Tshuva, who hits rock bottom, and it's his very darkness that brings him to a place that light never bring him. That is more than just saying that the Helam of Elikus leads to Gilui, like the Helam of the teacher leads to the student to understand more of the idea. Now, this is something we discussed at length in volume 3, both times that we learned it, especially the first time. And but here in this summary, in this essay, I obviously only write about it briefly because the whole point is to get the bigger picture, which we'll get to shortly. But later in this essay, I will discuss this more, especially in the last part that I've not yet finished, part 7. I discuss a lot more about this level of Einoid, because it's very useful, or very critical, I would say, in understanding the bigger picture, but we'll get to that soon as well. And if you remember when we were learning, and every time you asked me the question about Einoid, I said, we'll get to it. Well, we're starting to get to it now, but first let's lay out the themes of Ayin Beis. So that concludes on page 1349. Now, what comes next? Next is what comes now. I'll stop here if anybody wants to ask anything. I will talk a lot more about this as we go along here. But remember, I'm doing it in an orderly fashion. We're first going to answer the last questions that the Rebbe Rashab left open and work our way back. So Einoid is going to be close to the end of this essay, not in the beginning, even though he did discuss it. Okay. By the way, that's just another indicator, because he never gets back to Einoid in the end of the Hemshech, and it makes very much sense that he would at some point. Again, I'll review that when we get to part 7. Chapter 7. Any questions so far?
Is
Okay,
that why oh, never mind.
Excuse me?
I was just going to say that the whole idea that Tzimtzum being able to reveal the light in a much deeper way is, could you make the analogy to that is why the Baal Tshuva stands where the tzaddik can't stand, or is that not analogous?
That's connected to the very fact that the concealment itself has a power that's greater than light. Yes, you can. He says that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
But that's different than saying that the tzimtzum, the concealment, is in order to reveal. That's more in every situation where a student, even if he's not a Baal Tshuva, he begins as a child, learns the idea with tzimtzum, and the tzimtzum he slowly grows in his understanding, so that tzimtzum becomes like a channel through which he can grow and expand and experience more revelation. But that's two separate tracks.
Okay, thank you.
One is light illuminating darkness, and one is darkness itself, revealing a deeper dimension of the divine.
Are you putting numbers on the pages that you
Every page has a number, yes. Are you looking at it?
I don't see numbers.
Every page. I'm on page 3 right now. Are you looking at the PDF or the Word document?
And the PDF.
Right here, number 3 at the bottom of the page.
Look at the bottom of the page.
I don't know. I'm looking here. See,
Are you looking at your phone? Where are you looking?
I'm home now. Part 1,
on your phone?
That on the phone, yes.
Anyway, I see page 3.
And the dot 1-6.docx.
That's the name of the document, Rabbi Teisel.
At the bottom of the page. At the bottom of the page.
I have one long, no division, nothing. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong place.
Is it the new one? Okay.
I don't
He only made a PDF.
I think he said he just found it. Okay,
fine. Let's continue.
Could you tell me a bit of what is the last thing that you sent?
The PDF.
Okay.
Okay. If you're having problems, wait till after the class. I'm sure Yitzchak will help you. Good. The Khan, continuing now. La'achre arichas habir. After this long discussion, from page 790 through 1349, that's the 559 pages, by Yichud Mamata Lamaila, in the Yichud from the bottom up, Maschil Ba'omer Aleph Shinun, he begins on page 1350, the explanation in the Yichud Mamayla Lamato. And this is the exact language of the Rebbe Rashab on top of 1350. So you see clearly that Rebbe Rashab delineating between what came before, and now we will understand Torah, which is a transmission from the top down. And just briefly, as we know, davening is initiated from the person, the mispal, the person who's praying. So it's true, we've gotten the words and the letters from Torah from Hashem, but tefillah is essentially generated from the person. Torah is Amshach Mamayla. Obviously, the person has to learn Torah, but the Torah itself is God gave us His wisdom and says, now learn it. So it's Mamayla Mata with overlap, as we shall learn later. And now he begins. How does he begin explaining this? Amshach Mamayla Mata. This is in volume 3, page 1350. He begins Maskil Abir, according to the Pasuk, Ner Mitzvah V'Teira Er. I see it's missing the word Er. I have to add the word Er. Ner Mitzvah V'Teira Er. And Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. And this is all based on the foundation, you saw the foundation of the Drush, Hamagbil L'Sheves, of the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe. And I'm continuing, this is all part of the summary of where we are now, volume 3. Reishis, first of all, the Rebbe Rashab sums up that which is explained in this drush, in this mimer, Ba'avonis inyan haner, in understanding what exactly is a ner. A ner is a candle. Ner Hashem nishmas Adam, sheyesh by psila, has a wick which is the divine soul nefesh alikis. Sheyeredes v'nechneses ba'shemen seichel shal nefesh abamis. It's inserted. It descends and is inserted in the oil. That's the seichel, the intelligence of the animal soul. V'sheyeves memenu, and the wick draws from the oil, to transform it into being not just oil, but oil that will fuel the light, the divine light, and the love of God. So b'shnei yitzurech, with both sides of the heart, nefesh alikis, nefesh abamis. That's ner Hashem nishmas Adam. The Chem Benegel Ner Mitzvah. This is all the summary of Ayin Beis of the Maimer Magbi, the Sheves. That Ratzon Hashem is the Psila. A mitzvah is God's will. That's the wick. HaMislabes Begeshem Ha'elam Shemen. Levarei. That divine will manifests in the physical world, which is the oil, in order to refine it. The mitzvah also has a special feature or quality that helps refine the animal soul until the point that you elevate the animal soul and the world. So not just ner mitzvah, but now teira oir, an oir atzmi, more than just a diminished light, but the full intensity of a core essential light of Teira Er. And that's on page 1352. So those 3 pages, 1350, 51, to the top of 1352, he explains this summary. Then the Rebbe Rashab continues. V'nirali levayra inyan, and appears to me to explain this inyan, says that it writes that the Rebbe Rashab, according to what explains elsewhere regarding Eir Hariyah. And now he introduces vision, eyesight. Which Maimer is he referring to? The Mavur b'Mokam Acher, Who dibra maskil ve'neinu me'irish l'admur hazoken. That's referring to the Maimer ve'neinu me'iris of the Alter Rebbe, and the citation here is Mamori Admor Hazoken, page 460 and on, and there's an explanation there on 462. Ubarichas Habir, here too, we have a lengthy Maimer that elaborates on this from the Mittler Rebbe, and there are two versions of that, and this was not published yet. Lo yotzu le'er le'esata. Kafishi is bar lekama beperik hey. As we shall later explain in chapter 5 of this essay. Okay, now a little more of the summary. We have another few, let's see here. Yeah. So we're going a little more of the summary. So he says now like this. Let me stop. Any questions?
So that means that the Ein Oid is der Helem Ho'atzmi?
I said I'm not going to discuss that now. That's going to be discussed in chapter 7. Where do you see Helem Atzmi here? You mean I read earlier?
Just a few minutes ago, you spoke about the Ein Oid, that the symptom is the Heilige.
It's going to be the Helem Atzmi, but it's going to be the Helem Atzmi, yes? Yes. Yeah. Okay? Yeah, the Helem Atzmi. Okay. Now, let's continue the summary here. Umamshich levayir. Now the Rebbe Rashab continues to explain Gimel Dargis be'er hamakabel Malchus. That there are 3 levels in Er Makabel. That's the Er Ariya, eyesight, vision, the Er Halavana, the moonlight, and the Er of the Even Toiv, which is, like he's going to say, Derech Er Halavana, Er Behira Shel Even Toiv, the light of the moon, the light of a shining, lustrous, luminous stone, the Er Ariya, and eyesight. Shekenegda Mikra Mishnah v'Talmud, corresponding to Mikra, Mishnah, and Talmud. Sholish Ramesh Achdoros Teira'eh L'chaim L'chayenu L'kiyumenu. 3 levels of the Torah penetrating our lives and our existence. B'shoshim Mekere Ba'atzmus Ein Sof L'chochmeh D'Atzilus Ad Lamata Mata. From the highest source in Atzmus Ein Sof, all the way into Chochmah V'Atzilus, all the way below. So right here you see he's talking about Torah. Mikra, Mishnah, and Talmud are 3 levels in Torah. So already talking about Torah but these 3 levels in Makabel. Hey Mamai Lamata. This is both Mamai Lamata, the Torah, Nisinus HaTorah, Mamai, the Torah being given to us, the Torah Shebiksav. That's the written Torah Hashem gave us by Matan Torah. Hey Mamata Lamaila. The Torah also has an element of Mamata Lamaila, through our immersion in the oral Torah, and especially in Talmud, which is called a dark state, because the things there are not so clear, and you have to, from darkness, come to light. And Mishnah is a type of interface between Mikra and Talmud, all explained on page, up to those pages, all the way to page 1364 and on. Valpi Hanal, continuing on. Now the Rebbe, once he explains that, he says, we'll understand the mashal of Er Hariyah, which has
What's
2
the difference
aspects to it.
between Mishnah and Talmud? What's the difference?
I look up the page, you'll see inside. This is just a summary. Did we say Mishnah and Talmud? The whole discussion, like 20 pages on that. The Mishnah has the oyer of Matan Torah, ish mipi ish, and Talmud does not. You remember?
Yeah.
Yeah. But here, all the pages are cited here, so if anybody wants more elaboration on anything, this is just a kitzur, as you can see. If you want more, just go to those pages and you can have all the explanation. Now, with this, we'll understand the example of Eirariya that has two aspects to it. One, Kafisha Mislabish Bekleya Ayin Bagbala, as the power of vision manifests in the very vessel of the eye vessel, and that's, of course, a limited manifestation. Etzem Koyach Hariyah Shalamayla Magbala, the very core power of vision within the soul that does not have these limitations. Like we discussed, if you remember. The eye, when you see with your eye, you can only see that far. You cannot see in the dark. That's the most important point. The power of Etzem Koyach Hariyah doesn't have those limitations, but that we don't have access to that power. That's why we need an outside light to illuminate the eye. So he says like this now. And similarly is the relationship between the neshama, the Eir of the neshama, the Neir of the neshama, and Teir. B'tchilas Aveda, in the beginning of the Aveda, Haneshama lamata tzrichas siyua, me'er chutz mimena lehoyer ulehoyer is derech hachayim be'elam hachoshech hazeh. A neshama on its own has to begin by first getting support from an outside light, meaning namely Teir, to direct and guide it in this dark world. If we didn't have Torah, as much as the neshama has the flame of God in it, but it's concealed, how would we know what to do, what's right, what's wrong, what's a mitzvah, what's not a mitzvah? So all the paths of life are darkened in this world. So the Torah illuminates that. Like the eye itself, it has the power to see on its own. It doesn't need something else for it to see, meaning the eye itself sees. But the eye in a dark place needs an outside light to shine. Once it shines, then the eye itself can see. That's the beginning of Aveda. But the end of the Aveda, after we refine the body and the world, Haneshama atzma magia l'sharsha l'mayla min ha-Torah. Then the neshama rises and reaches a level that's higher than Torah. K'may etzem koyach hariyah, because it's going now into etzem koyach hariyah, which does not need an outside light. V'roya ba'atzmei, and he can see himself without any outside light. Acha neshama mashpia b'Torah er matzmusei yizbarach. Furthermore, the neshama not only does it not need Torah, it actually is mashpia into Torah from a higher level of atzmos. So bottom line is the neshama has an etzem in it, but in this world is dark. Through our Aveda, we illuminate through Torah, like we're going to learn now what illuminates. But then the neshama elevates to a level that's higher than Torah and is mashpia in Torah and mashpia in malachim and mashpia in everything. Okay. Any questions?
I just wanted to clarify understanding how you divided, or I know you're summarizing the Rebbe, but you wrote this, so I say how you divided. That the second point, etzem koach hariyah shelamayla hagbala, the hagbala of Riyah is that without siua and without transformation, the hagbala, the limitation is the fact that the eye can't see with everything, or it certainly can't. Yeah, it can't see. It can't illuminate. It can't be a ma'or, and that's the limitation.
I cannot see in the dark.
Right.
So
Okay.
I cannot know what to do in this world without Torah.
Okay. And then this. Sorry. No, you answered. Thank you very much. The second question, to follow up, is the reason why, I guess it's lastly Lavo, that the eye will be able to see in the dark is because the goof or the sechel enoshi of the human will have been transformed by the avoda, and so it will have been essentially elevated in the sense of it's more godly. So once it's been transformed in that way, then it I guess lastly, when there's a complete revelation of Elokus throughout the world and also from the human, then it will overcome that hagbala, and it will be able to see. And it's,
Let's
in
just,
other words, is that correct?
well, I'd make it a lot simpler because what you're saying is it can be confusing.
Uh-huh.
The simplest, very simple. When a student begins studying, they need a teacher to direct and guide them, right?
Mm-hmm.
As the student gets more acclimated and learns more, they can learn on their own. They can
I
see on
see.
their own. That's the simple way of understanding.
Mm-hmm. But the turning point, if you will, is transformation of eyesight. No?
No, it's the growth that the
Oh, it's just
person has
growth.
learned. Yeah, the growth and maturity that the person has gotten to a point where they don't need a teacher, at least not for what they once needed, because they have developed the tools themselves to see and understand and learn an idea.
Well, I hear you loud and clear, and that's helpful. But there's two kind of concepts that the Rebbe Rashab talked about in the Hemshech. One was the maturation process, and sorry, I don't remember the three stages. But everyone
Mutva,
knows.
murgish, and muskal.
Thank you. That's one aspect, which is maturation, and the other is that the shemen is itself, or the sethal enoshi is transformed. The shemen is used, dedicated toward godliness rather than toward itself. So that's why I'm coming to
Why
ask
can
you.
that be the last step of maturation?
Great point. That fuses the two concepts. So thank you. That was extremely helpful.
Okay. And remember, we're not talking about Einoid now, where the concealment itself has its own power to be mashpia. So far, I've not talked about it. That's going to be a discussion of its own. Is that the highest level? Because some places it does appear that it is, but we'll get to that. It's something that's not really clear in Ayin Beis, whether, because again, with also the question about Ein Oid is usually connected with Mamata L'mayla and Tefillah. Does it connect also with Torah, where a person can come to understand the idea in Torah like an Ein Oid level? And that I'm not sure about. But anyway, that's why I want to leave that for later.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, let's stick to this. He does mention Hamtakas Hagvuras B'Sharsham, which does definitely appears that the darkness itself is transformed, like the level of Ein Oid, but there's some confusion still about exactly where that fits into this whole picture. So we could say that there's the element of the maturation where the Elikim becomes a full transparent channel to Havaya. The question is, what about Elikim itself being rooted in the Etzem, like the Kalim, and the Helam being rooted in the Etzem and the Helam Ha'atzmi? How does that play into this?
Mm-hmm.
So that I would like to leave for later.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to go there. I was just trying to understand what you wrote. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
But it's possible what you said just now that Elikim, Kifi Shehu B'Shalshal, let's call it like this, is a part of Einoid which is above.
But it's a separate. But you know that. But it's a separate discussion from the level of where, like you could have the goof should be a complete transparent channel for the neshama, or the nefesh habamis is like shemen, oil, and its intelligence is used for godliness. There's another step where the nefesh habamis itself, or the helam itself, reveals and expresses a divine dimension, the helam ha'atzmi, that's not just revealing Havaya. It's not just the moon is revealing the sun. The moon itself is contributing something. That's what I want to leave for a little later.
Yes, I think I don't know, but I think that this is the situation. But it's not the moon itself in the way that we are imagining the moon. It's the moon itself, like it's the show, it is above it.
That's another step in the discussion, but I'll discuss that later as a separate state. I don't want to mix the two because they're two separate things. Okay, so let's continue. This is also the role, the function of the Chachamim, who are called Einei Ha'eda, the eyes of the people, the eyes of the community, the nation. Shemeirim umanhigim kol Yisrael al pi Torah. What is their role? Why do we need teachers? Why do we need leaders? Because they govern, they direct and guide all Jews according to Torah. V'kulin ozlin abasrayu. And everything follows them like eyes. Kamoi ukamoshel kamoshla enayim shemanhigim kol shayfa degufa. He brings from Zohar. Like the eyes, they govern, they direct all shayfa degufa, all the channels of the body. Without your eyes, you don't know where to go and where and how and what directs you. So Einei Ha'eda play that role. This is on the bottom of page 1399 and on. Okay, now there's more. The neshamas receive another support. So far we have Torah, we have the Einei Ha'eda, the leaders, the Sanhedrin, the teachers, and so on. And then we have the Malachim. Shenikraim Gamkin Einei Hashem. They too are called the eyes of God, meaning like God's supervisors. He appoints them to supervise. Because the soul, even though it's rooted higher than angels, when it descends below, the body, it manifests in the body and the animal soul, which conceal the powerful light of the neshama. That's why the neshama needs support from the malachim, like a support system. In order to awaken, stimulate, arouse its love and reverence. That's why we first say Birchis Yetzer that talks about Kodesh, 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 and the malachim, before Shema, in order to awaken and stimulate the flow of love and reverence that the malachim have in a revealed way, to help to the neshamas Yisrael, supporting and helping them get ignited. And when they do, as we shall soon discuss, or we discuss, they actually go higher than the malachim and they're mashpia to the malachim, as was taught, as we learned. Again, I'm not writing everything in the summary here for obvious reasons, just the main points in order to understand the flow, because all this is just to help us understand where would the Hemshech go afterwards. So a little more about the summary. Now, any questions on that? Okay. Ata, Ba'omad Aleph Tov Samach Gimel. Now we're up to page 1463. He returns the Rebbe Rashab Levayit Inyan Ner Hashem Nishmasad. This is what we learned in the last. Remember the Hemshech ends on 1477. So here we're talking now 1466. So this is the last 14 pages now. So I'm about to finish the summary, and then we'll continue. So with this he explains Ner Hashem Nishmasadam, the birur, the refinement of the animal soul through the divine soul. And he explains it according to what he continues explaining in the Maimar of Tere'er, Alter Rebbe, page 38b, c, and Maimari Admur Amtsoi, page 361, Anal. And Bekitzer, what does he say in sum? Kamoy b'moshla haner b'psila. I'm sorry, Kamoy b'moshla haner, like in the example of the candle. Hapsila sheyeves hashemen, the wick draws the oil. Shenichla v'nisrev ba'oir, what happens to the oil as it's drawn into the wick? It no longer remains oil. It now becomes nichla v'nisrev ba'oir. It gets consumed by the light, by the flame. At some point, the oil will be depleted. So it starts as oil, but then becomes light, flame. And that's what causes the light to be a bright light. Kamoy Kain, that's the mashal. Kamoy Kain hu ben Hashama, we're now on page 4. Same thing with the soul. Ner Hashem nishmas hamelubeshes beguf, that manifests in the body. Shehi apsila she'eves, shehi apsila, which is the wick. So the wick, the nefesh alikis inserted into the oil of the nefesh habamis, it draws the wisdom and intelligence of the animal soul, shahu hashemen, that's the oil, liyesnichla ba'er elikid neshama, to be encompassed and consumed into the elikid of the neshama. So it shouldn't remain just intelligence of the animal soul. It's now becoming light, flame. It's contributing, becoming fuel to the flame, the divine flame of God, of the soul. And actually, the animal soul is contributing light to this neshama, because the neshama itself, the wick, would burn out very quickly. It's the oil of the animal soul that feeds the nefesh alikis and increases its power. Koloimer, this means hagam the nefesh alikis, the nefesh habamis heim hofchim zemizeh. Though the divine and animal soul are diametric opposites, betachlis, because the divine intelligence of the divine soul, the intelligence of the divine soul is fundamentally only godliness. That's all the soul wants to understand. The neshama is always looking to understand everything from a spiritual perspective. And the divine soul's intelligence sees existence all as being completely sublimated into the divine. On the other hand, the seichel the nefesh habam is who rak b'tzorchei atzmei hachumrim. The intelligence of the animal soul on its own is only in its physical needs, in its coarse, crass needs. B'hakshama v'hayeshes dafke. After the things that are base and material driven. So, nevertheless, even though they're opposites, here's the chiddush. The divine soul manifests and unites with the animal soul. And the divine seichel, intelligence of the divine soul, manifests within the natural intelligence of the animal soul. To the point that it can affect that the nefesh habamis, with its natural intelligence, like he said, examples from science and so on, can understand the divine concept. Not just understand, to the point that the nefesh habamis can become excited in a form of love. And it'll be consumed and be encompassed in the light of love, the fiery love of the divine soul. Loving God with both sides of the heart. And through this process, the nefesh alikis is drawing and transforming the oil of the animal soul. This causes an abundance of energy in the divine soul, more than it would have on its own. The light, the additional quality of light that comes from a dark place. Now, is this einoid or not? I would say it's two levels, and we'll again discuss this later. But it's definitely a level that the cheshach of the nefesh habam is just like talmidei yesim mekulam. The student ultimately sharpens the mind of the teacher, because it's coming precisely from a lower level. Here it's even more so, because the nefesh habam is. So you see here how the shemen, the oil, is increasing the flame that the wick itself would not have been able to do. So that itself is another aspect to this process. Okay. Any questions?
Yes, I have a question about something we never talked about, but it's implicated by this paragraph that you just read and summarized from the Mimer, from the Hemshech, which is what happens to the neshama when it's not able to transform the shemen, which is the seichel enoshi, the human intellect, And obviously, we understand that the neshama is like, pintel yid. It's like a pilot light that never goes out, but it doesn't necessarily flourish. And if it's not able to ever harness the goof or the seichel, the human intellect, does that correspond? In other words, how far can we push the muscle? Does that?
Nobody is doomed. That's why we work on ourselves and we try to inspire others.
Yes, I understand.
That's the work we all do.
Right, no, for sure. Let me try. I'm trying to push the muscle. Let's take, for example, a secular yid. Okay, nothing
I know
wrong with the
exactly what you're
person.
talking about. So I just said nobody is doomed. Everybody has a soul, and we constantly work on inspiring it in ourselves and in others. You're
I
telling me,
understand.
you ask me if it's impossible to do. It's not impossible.
No, that wasn't my question. A person can do tshuva in the last breath of their life. I get that, and they can all of a
And
sudden be greater.
we all can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. My question is the failure, if you will, and it can be just a passive failure. There's lack of ignorance, a lack of education. Can that cause sort of, how shall I say, blockage is a strong word because that implies sin.
The whole Tanya Chassidus talks about that. Yes, of course. If a person, you and I, forget about secular people. You and I also have a Yetzer Hara, right?
Yes.
So that's exactly what he talks about in Tanya and in hundreds of places, that the Yetzer Hara and the Nefesh Habamis on their own, like he said here, indulging in its own material desires is an obstacle that closes off. It's like somebody being criminal. So even though they have a beautiful soul, but it's like a blocked artery that's not allowing the soul to be manifest.
Mm-hmm. Okay, 100%.
That's a given.
He said,
The key is that the goal is to remove that block and indeed transform the animal soul into fuel for the divine.
I understand.
Of course, it's possible the other way around. That's unfortunately is more common than the transformation part.
Yeah, I was just trying to get to where you got through the muscle and not through the Tanya.
Well, Tanya, I'm just quoting, is one place where it elaborates, but it's really a point he talks about in Ayin Beis too. When the Nefesh Habamis is full force and Nefesh Elikis is not, you're going to have blockages, and that's exactly what we're fighting here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
What are the Chachamim Einei Ha'edo doing for the neshama? The same way that the Malachim are doing?
No, but just look in our lives. What does a teacher do for you when you were in school? A mashpia, a rov, a rebbe, a Moshe Rabbeinu. Ask yourself, very practical. What do they do for us? They teach us, they guide us, they inspire us, they help us resolve issues and problems. They're a living example. Malachim is another siyua. The Eibishter also sent malachim. Malachim are not quite teachers. We wouldn't call them Einei Ha'eda, you call them Einei Hashem. But by saying in Birchas Yetzer, for example, but the malachim, it says that Nefesh Habamis is inspired by reading or hearing about the inspiration of the malachim as they say Kaddish, 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 and the Srofim and the Chayes HaKodesh and the Ifanim. So it's like looking at someone who's davening. I gave the example that inspires you. So it's an additional inspiration. And the more support we can get, the better it is. So Hashem gave us many different support systems. Teda, Einei Ha'eda, Malachim, and more actually.
The Chachamim Einei Ha'edo are not in the category of the neshama, behelem, beguf, correct?
Well, they help illuminate where the Helem and the Guf are there. That's their role, to help illuminate. If we didn't have a Helem, we wouldn't need anybody's help. Then we could see it ourselves.
My point is that they themselves are not in that category. They are not in the category of the Helem Badem.
In Ayin Beis, he talks about it. Everybody is affected by the Helem of this world, even Einei Ha'eda to some extent.
Moshe
Look, Moshe
Rabbeinu?
Rabbeinu only reached Shar Memtes. He didn't reach Shar Anun till the end. Everything is Lefiyerech, relative.
And that's why everyone is waiting for Mashiach?
That's one reason. Yeah. And then there's always, it's Ein Sof. As much as you reach, there's always more to reach. There's a whole section in volume 3 about La Sovet Tzadikai B'tiyufta. Mashiach, also La Sovet Tzadikai B'tiyufta. The effect Mashiach will have on the tzaddikim to do tshuva. He explains what that means at length in volume 3. Okay. I think we'll stop here because the next section is literally going to be, I'm going to sum up the end, the last questions he asks in Ayin Beis, and then what he says, and then we're going to go back to what he doesn't say, but we can derive from the Mittler Rebbe and the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimorim. So we'll move along. We're middle of page 4 now of this essay. Are there any other questions?
Just one afterthought about the benefits of what you're doing right now, because I remember I heard the story when Rabbi showed another person something that he had already wrote, and then in front of that person he crossed that statement and wrote something more. And the person asked him if that what he had already wrote was not true. And the Rebbe said that at that time when I wrote that, it was true, and now I have more to add. What you're doing right now, I believe, for each of us who already learned Ayin Beis, is going to be like resurrections of the dead, because the bones that we had before, we had some kind of structure of Ayin Beis. Now, these structures, bones, became the flesh, like the bones got the flesh on them, and we hopefully will imagine it more vivid and more precise as a life itself.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, so we'll stop here, right? Let's stop here, page 4 of the summary of the essay, I should say.